Shalom. Welcome to part 2 of the talks on what is a day, evening to evening or morning to morning. Now we're going to be looking at the Passover from Shemot, which is Exodus chapter 12, 1 to 14. But before we do, we need to look at Leviticus 22 verses 29 and 30. And it states here, and when you bring a slaughtering of thanksgiving to Yahuwah, bring it for your acceptance. In that same day it shall be eaten. Leave none of it until the morning. I am Yahuwah. Now there are two main points to bring out here, and the first is that many sacrifices were to be eaten on the same day of the slaughter, which is exactly the same for the Passover sacrifice, and we shall see that. But also it does not say the time of day that you were to do the actual slaughterings, but it was normally normal for all slaughterings to take place during daylight hours, and I've never heard of sacrifices taking place at twilight or night time. And if you can't see properly, then killing animals with sharp knives would be highly irresponsible, to say the least. Now the second and most telling point to bring out in this verse is a statement, in that same day it shall be eaten. Leave none of it until the morning. This is actually saying that the nighttime part is part of the preceding daytime, and that the following morning or dawning is a new day. Now Leviticus 7 verse 15 also states, as for the flesh of the slaughtering of his peace offering for thanksgiving, it is eaten the same day it is offered. He does not leave any of it until the morning. The important words here again are, is eaten the same day it is offered, and none shall be left till the morning or dawn. And the word for morning in both verses is boker, which means dawning. So it's saying that the dawn is a different day. It's not the same day. And it's clear to me that the day precedes the evening, and the dawn is a new day. The boker, the dawning, is the morning, is a new day. And to try to twist this to say something else would actually be downright dishonest, to say the least. And now for the Passover. I'll be reading from Shemot, this is Exodus, chapter 12 verses 1 through 14. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe and to Aaron in the land of Mitzrayim, saying, this restored moon is the beginning of restored moons for you. It is the first restored moon of the year for you. Speak unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this restored moon, each one of them is to take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, let him and his neighbour next to his house take it according to the number of the beings. According to each man's need you take your count for the lamb. Let the lamb be a perfect one, a year-old male. Take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same restored moon. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in between the evenings, and they shall take some of the blood and put it on 2 doorposts and the lintels of the houses where they eat it, and they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, with its head, with its legs, and its inward parts. And do not leave of it until morning. And what remains of it until morning you are to burn with fire. And this is how you are to eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Passover of Yahuwah, and I shall pass through the land of Mitzrayim on that night, and shall smite all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both man and beast. And upon all the mighty ones of Mitzrayim I shall execute judgment. I am Yahuwah. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I shall pass over you, and let the plague not come on you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Mitzrayim. And this day shall become to you a remembrance, and you shall observe it as a festival to Yahuwah throughout your generations. Observe it as a festival. It's an everlasting law. Okay, now let's assume that the commonly accepted view that the day begins at evening time, whenever that time might be, and continues through the night, incorporating the next day or the daylight hours until the next evening time. So on this reckoning, the 14th day of Abib will actually start on the evening time at the end of the 13th day, or the daylight hours on the 13th of Abib. It will go on through the night, and at the end of the evening time on the 14th, and it would end on the evening time on the 14th when the daylight hours are over. This would mean that the evening which starts on the 14th of Abib will be the beginning of the 15th of Abib, which is the first day of the Feast of Matzah. And it's a high Sabbath on which no work at all may be done, not even the work and acts of judgment by the Mighty One himself. Now, also, keeping with this traditionalist view, verse 10 tells us that none of the meat was to be left until the morning or dawn. According to tradition, this dawn must be the dawn after the evening or the night of the 14th of Abib. So none of the meat was to be left past the dawning of the day of the 14th of Abib. It must be consumed by fire on the morning of the 14th of Abib. Now, Scripture tells us that the Passover is to occur on the 14th of Abib, not the 13th or the 15th, but on the 14th. So, Passover, according to tradition, actually starts on the evening at the end of the daylight hours on the 13th of Abib, and finishes on the evening at the end of the daylight hours on the 14th of Abib, which starts a new day, which is the Feast of Matzah. Now verse 6 clearly tells us that the Passover sacrifice is to be slaughtered between the evenings on the 14th of Abib. Between the evenings must be what it says, between two evenings. The bayin is between. It means in between two things. Now, when you average out what sort of time is in between the evenings, it averages out roughly, it's an estimation, I know, about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, which is, I think, is a reasonable estimation, and it's also the time that the Messiah was actually sacrificed when you read through the renewed covenant writings. So the actual sacrifice would occur about 3 p.m. on the 14th of Abib, that is during the daylight hours. Now let's say that's about 6 hours before nightfall. Say nightfall was 9 p.m. and the sacrifice will occur about 3 p.m. It's very close. It's very close to the start of the evening time, if it isn't actually in the evening time itself, not forgetting that the evening can start as early as 3 p.m. The best case scenario we can have is that this occurred at the most 6 hours before the start of 15th of Abib, which is the Feast of Matzah, or High Sabbath. Now, we come to the first problem with the traditional Passover view, the traditional start of the day, which is in the evening. In verse 8 we are told, and they shall eat the flesh on that night. So, the sacrifice of the Passover lamb should be eaten the very night after the sacrifice. Right. because on that night Yahuwah was going to pass over the land and judge the firstborn of Egypt. Now we get a problem. You can't eat the lamb before it is sacrificed, before it's killed. And as the lamb was killed in the daylight hours of the 14th of Aviv, and according to the traditionalist view, the evening of the 14th of Aviv came before the daylight hours, that means that the Passover lamb was to be eaten on the 15th of Aviv, which is the first day of the Feast of Matzah. Now this shows something's very, very wrong. Because that's saying the tradition, you can't have it any other way. If the Passover lamb killed in the daylight hours on the 14th, that following evening it is to be eaten, and that following evening, a high Sabbath, Yahuwah is going to break his word, basically his own rulings, and do the works of judgment on the high Sabbath. It doesn't work. It shows something is very wrong, and it shows that the Passover didn't happen on the Passover. It didn't happen on the 14th of Aviv. It actually happened on the 15th, the first day of the Feast of Matzah. This shows something is very, very wrong with this way of thinking. Any person who doesn't have their eyes blinkered with tradition or closed mind will be able to see that there's something wrong here. Also, which leads us to the second problem, that the sacrifice is to be eaten in the day of its slaughter, right? So if it's killed in a day, it can't be left to the next day. Now, if the day starts in the evening, and then this sacrifice is killed during the daylight hours on the 14th of Aviv, and it's eaten the next night, the night following, then it's not eaten on the same day. It's not eaten the same day it's killed. It's eaten on another day. And that goes against the clear pattern of Scripture and the clear teaching of Scripture. Also, if you look about it, when it says, and you shall eat it on that night, or that evening, or that night, it's connecting the night to the preceding day. It's actually connecting the night which follows the daylight hours on the 14th of Aviv actually belongs to the 14th of Aviv and not the 15th. And that is the only way this Passover actually works according to Scripture. Another problem we face is the consuming of the meat by fire at the dawning of a day, of the next day. Now the word for dawning is boker, and it means in the morning. It means dawning as the sun comes up. If the remainder of the meat was to be burnt at the dawning of a new day in the morning, that means that the Passover lamb would have had to have been killed on the 14th and the previous evening and ate overnight and burnt before the dawn come up of the 14th of Aviv. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't work. How can the Passover lamb be slaughtered in between the evenings if it is slaughtered in an evening? And the word in the original Hebrew is definitely bayin, which is in between. There's another word, is ba'arev. Is the B is the beit, and the aleph is in the. Bayin ha'arev is in between the evenings. So it's two different words. So if it was to be slaughtered in a Pacific evening, it would have told us though. There's a word for it. But no, it's not. If we're not told that, we're told it's got to be in between the evenings, or be in between two evenings. So it just doesn't work. It only works fluidly if the day starts at dawn. Now, also, verse 12 tells us that Yahuwah will pass over the land of Mitzrayim that night. The night after the Passover lamb was slain, and it was after the blood was put upon the doorposts and the lintels, after it was eaten in the houses, not before. So this would actually give us another problem. If it happens after the slaughtering, then Yahuwah pass over Mitzrayim in judgment on the first day of the Feast of Matzah, which is a high Sabbath, wherein no work shall be done at all, and that includes the work of judgment. And if this is the case, then Yahuwah himself broke his own command that no work should be done on this day, which in turn would make the mighty authority, the creator of all life and all living, a hypocrite. And obviously that's not so. So, according to Judaism and 95% of the Messianic movement, the Passover started on the evening of the 13th, 14th of Aviv, carried on through the next night to the next dawning. Then at around 3 p.m. the sacrifice was made, and the following evening, Passover day, was finished. Then, of course, on the next day, starting in the evening on the day of Matzah, a high Sabbath, the Passover actually happened. It simply doesn't make any logical sense. If it doesn't make sense, then it cannot be right. Yes, a daylight period does end at an evening or a night time, yes, absolutely. But the next day does not start in darkness, it starts in the dawning, the coming of light. The evening belongs to the day preceding it, not to the day following it. You know, I pointed all these out to a dear friend of mine and told him that I believe the only way to resolve these problems with the evening to evening day cycle was to revert back to a dawn day cycle. And his reply was no. The Passover was indeed killed on the 14th of Aviv, but it was eaten on the 15th, on the evening of the 15th of Aviv. No, that's not what Scripture says. This would, and that's a view of many Messianics. But this would mean that Yahuwah passed over on the 15th of Aviv, not the 14th of Aviv. And as I stated before, this would make Yahuwah a hypocrite for breaking his own commands. And let's face it, the creation account tells us that Yahuwah kept the Sabbath, for he rested on the seventh day and set it apart. So if Yahuwah rested on the Sabbath himself that he instituted, I cannot see him becoming a hypocrite by breaking his own high Sabbath by doing the work of judgment and passing over Mitzrayim on the high Sabbath of Matzah. I want to quote from a leader called Monty Judah from the Lion and Lamb Ministries in America. He states in the Yovel publication called The Order of the Cedar, and a quick note here, I'm not speaking against a man. I respect some of his teachings, for the most part anyway, and find he has many wonderful insights. But he's not perfect, none of us are. We're all learning, and our understanding is not yet where it should be. There's a lot more for us to learn and understand. But there will come a time when we will be perfected in because Yahushua himself will be teaching us his instructions from Jerusalem. Quoting from Monty Judah and his Order of the Cedar. The term twilight, Erev, may confuse some, but in temple worship it is actually 3 p.m. in the afternoon and leads to evening, the start of the next day. When Israel observed the Passover, they would bring the lambs to the temple on the afternoon of the 13th. The lambs would be slain at twilight. The blood of the lambs would be drained and poured out at the base of the altar, and the lambs would be carried to their homes for the Seder meal that night. At homes, the lambs would be skinned but not dressed. This sounds very reasonable at first glance, doesn't it? But when you look at it, and that was the end of quote with the dress, but this does sound very reasonable at first glance. But when you look at it on closer inspection, we see there are some problems with this sort of understanding. Now, he states that the twilight is at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. It is still daylight and not a physical evening. Also, the scripture actually tells us that the lamb was to be slain between the evenings, not during any specific evening, but between evenings must, by the very definition of the word between, be between two things, or two time periods, be they during the daylight hours or what. If the slaying of the lamb was to be carried out at the time of an evening, then it would have told us so. A different word or a different prefix to a word would have been used. The word is very specific, and the Passover is so important to the whole plan of redemption that the wording must be specific and plain so that ordinary folk like myself can understand it. Another problem that we have is that if at 3 p.m. temple worship started at 3 p.m. and it was killed at 3 p.m. it's actually killed at 3 p.m. on the 13th of Abib, not on the 14th, which goes against scripture. Now, another problem I find with this is the time when the Messiah told his disciples to prepare a place for the Passover observance. And here I quote from Yochanan, which is John chapter 13 verses 1 and 2, but I'll quote more to show context. John 13:1. And before the festival, take note, and before the festival of Passover, Yahushua, knowing that his hour had come, that he should move out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own who were in this world, he loved them to the end. And supper taking place, the devil already having already put into the heart of Yehuda from Kirioth, son of Shimeon, to deliver him up, Yahushua, knowing that the Father had given all unto his hands, and that he had come from Elohim, and he was going to Elohim, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. After that he put water into a basin and began to wash the feet of the taught ones, and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. And so he came to Shimon Kepha, and he said to him, Master, you do not wash my feet. Master, do you wash my feet? And Yahushua answered and said to him, you do not know what I am doing now, but you shall know after this. And Kepha says to him, by no means shall you wash my feet ever. And Yahushua said to him, if I do not wash your feet, you have no part with me. Now, many people teach that this was a Passover Seder that Yeshua was keeping with his disciples, but it can't have been. I mean, verse 1 states that this fact. Verse 2 tells us it was a supper and not a Passover meal. Verse 1 tells us it's basically the preceding day where they prepare for the Passover, but verse 2 tells us it was a supper and not a Passover meal. This was also a meal on the evening before he was handed over to temple authorities, in the early hours of the morning. If this was a Passover Seder, then the Passover lamb would have been slain before they ate it, and the Messiah would have died about 3 p.m. the following daylight. And we know this for sure because there was an eclipse which lasted miraculously about 3 hours. Now, Messiah died. If this is the case, if they ate a Passover meal the evening before the Passover, the Messiah died at the wrong time, because the Passover lamb must be slain before the Passover meal, otherwise there isn't a Passover meal. And that would have made the Messiah unfit to be the perfect Lamb of Yahuwah. Or the people killed the lamb. If Messiah died at the wrong time, then the people killed and slaughtered the lamb at the wrong time, and they ate a Passover meal at the wrong time. And now, if this is the case, then the Messiah, Yahushua, would have kept the Passover meal at the wrong time as well, making him again unfit for purpose of being the Messiah. And this is another reason why Yeshua could not have shared a Passover meal at this time with his Talmudim, because he died the next day as the Passover lamb. Now, another quick point. The other accounts do seem to tell us that Yahushua kept this Passover with his disciples, and on reading them it does indeed seem to be the case, yes. But remembering this would have been at least a third time the Talmudim would have be ready to prepare for the coming Passover, and they would want to prepare for the coming day of celebration. They did indeed ask him about preparing for the Passover, and he gave them instructions for doing so. And they would have gone to prepare, setting all things ready for the next day's sacrifice, a room, the matzah, etc. That evening before the Passover, they would have shared a meal together, and it was that evening that he was betrayed by Judas, taken to the temple for examination, and then off to be slaughtered at the right Passover time between the evenings of the 14th of Aviv. Now, a final verse to show that the evening after the 3 p.m. sacrifice within the daylight hours of the 14th of Aviv actually belongs to the 14th of Aviv and does not start a new day or the 15th of Aviv is in Shemot, or Exodus chapter 12 verse 18. And it states, in the first renewed or restored moon of the 14th day of the restored moon, in the evening you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month in the evening. Right. Here it's talking about the evening which belongs to the 14th of Aviv, and the eating of unleavened bread with the meat from the Passover sacrifice. Then the next day, the dawn, 15th of Aviv, starts 7 days of unleavened bread or matzah. If this sacrifice happens in the daylight hours of the 14th of Aviv, which the Messiah's death proves, along with the solar eclipse in the afternoon when the sun was darkened, then the eating of the meat from that sacrifice must happen on the coming evening. If we are to eat meat from the sacrifice in the evening after the sacrifice, then we are also to eat unleavened bread with it. So the evening of the 14th of Aviv must be preceded by the daylight hours of the 14th of Aviv, as it implies in this verse. Now, some people argue that unleavened bread will be eaten for 7 days and not 8 days. Absolutely correct. But if you look on a closer inspection of the text, unleavened bread is eaten for 7 days, but it is 7 days plus 1 evening. It's the 7 days starts. There's 7 24-hour days, but it starts from the 14th of Aviv in the evening, which is after daylight hours, and it ends 7 days later at evening. It's the daylight part. So it's simple. It does actually work. Now, the only way this can work smoothly and simply is for the day to start at dawn. And to me, it's that simple. Now, my final proof I want to show is from the day of Yom Kippurim. And it's a verse, Leviticus 23:32, which is often used to by the evening to evening camp, for want of a better term, to prove the day starts in the evening. And it states, a high Sabbath, chapter 23 verse 32 states, a high Sabbath it shall be to you on the 9th day of the renewed or restored moon in the evening. From evening unto evening you shall rest your Sabbath. It is a Sabbath of rest to you. Or Leviticus, it can state, it is a Sabbath of rest to you, and you shall afflict your beings on the 9th day of the month at evening. From evening to evening you observe your Sabbath. And that comes from Scripture 98. Now, I was presented with the above scripture and was told, see, the day is from evening to evening. It plainly says so. You can't escape it. And on first glance, it sure looked as though they were correct, and that this talk and all this work I've done is totally in vain. But on closer inspection, I discovered this was a classic case of a verse of scripture being taken right out of its context and made to say something it was never intended to say. And to show you exactly what I mean, I will type out all of the relevant verses. I shall speak, actually, in the document is typed out, all of the relevant verses which precede this last verse to show the complete context. The passage starts with verse 26 of the same chapter and is talking about the Day of Atonement, or the Day of Coverings, also known as the Day of Reconciliations. And Yahuwah, he spoke unto Moshe, surely on the 10th day of this 7th restored moon is a day of atonement or coverings. It is a set apart assembly meeting. It shall be to you and your souls. It is a set apart assembly meeting. It shall be to you and your souls. They shall answer and respond, and come near and approach the fire of Yahuwah. And you shall not do any work of the heavenly messenger on this actual day, because it is a day of coverings, to put a cover upon you to face Yahuwah your mighty one. Because all your souls which do not respond on this actual day shall be cut off from their people, and all the souls which do any work of the heavenly messenger on the actual day, then I will destroy the soul from the midst of the people. You shall not do any work of the heavenly messenger. It is a prescribed rule perpetually to your generations in all your residences. A high Sabbath it shall be to you on the 9th day of the renewed moon in the evening. From evening unto evening you shall rest for your Sabbath. Right. This section of scripture, instead of being a death knell for the dawn to dawn day cycle, is actually proof for it, and it is a death knell for the evening to evening. The Day of Atonement is, in fact, an evening to evening affair, and it lasts for 24 hours. But as we see from verse 32, it actually starts on the evening of the 9th day of the renewed moon. But verse 27 tells us that the daylight portion of this great day is on the 10th day of the renewed moon. This proves without any doubt that the evening of the 9th day is followed by the daylight hours of the 10th day, and not the other way round. Because if it's the other way round, you'd have the evening of the 9th day followed by the daylight hours of the 9th day, followed by the evening of the 10th day, followed by the daylight hours of the 10th day. And if it's evening to evening, then Yom Kippurim lasts for 48 hours and not for 24. It just won't work. Now, some will try and wiggle their way out of this, but to do so is difficult, because by their reckoning the evening of the 9th day, as I said, is followed by daylight hours, and it ends up being a 48-hour days of Yom Kippurim. It's just not what Scripture says. It's an impossible scenario, and to try to push this would be ignorant at best and downright dishonest at worst, neither of which is good. So that Yom Kippurim lasts for 24 hours, but it is that 24 hours is spread over 2 days. It starts in the evening of the 9th and ends before the evening starts of the 10th, which makes it 24 hours. So the day must start at dawn. So, in conclusion, am I right? Am I wrong? Personally, I believe the evidence speaks for itself, and the day starts at dawning, or the morning, and the 24-hour day cycle ends at the next dawning, which also begins a new day, which fits in with the days of creation as well. Now, Occam's razor tells us that the law of economy, or of succinctness, is a principle urging one to select among competing hypotheses that which makes the fewest assumptions and thereby offers the simplest explanation to the effect. And that is what we're looking for. We're looking for the simplest explanation that will fit all the facts and with all the needs to fulfill all the requirements. And we must apply the principle of Occam's razor to this problem. And the simplest answer to when does the actual day start, at dawn or at evening, is answered by the simple statement: the day starts at dawn and ends 24 hours later at the next dawning. It solves all the problems of Passover. It means the sacrifices can take place at the appointed time. It could be eating in the following evening. The mighty one can pass over Mitzrayim about midnight without violating his own laws. And it means that the feast of matzah, or unleavened bread, can take place at the following dawn after the consumption of any meat left over from the previous evening. It also means Messiah would have died, and Yahushua would have died as a perfect lamb of Yahuwah at the appointed time. It means Yom Kippur all fits neatly and nicely into place, and it is so simple. It is also very, very simple and not complicated whatsoever. Yahuwah likes order. And let's face it, he created order out of chaos. Light was set free from darkness. Also the sun, light, was divided, the day from night. The light is called day, and so is not darkness. Darkness is called night and is not light. These are scriptural facts. So can day, which is light, actually start in darkness, or an evening leading to night? I think not. Now, for all those that hold on to the tradition, the traditional belief that the day starts in darkness, or twilight leading to darkness, I have to say to you two things. Be very careful you're not facing the darkness, because from a Hebrew perspective, from a Hebrew mindset, and don't forget this is how this was written, to look east is to look towards Yahuwah and his ways, his Torah. For he says he is light. So when we look to the start of the day at dawn, we look to the east, we look to Yahuwah. And by the same token, when we look to the darkness, the start of the day and the evening, we're looking forward to the darkness. We're looking to the west. We're looking away from Yahuwah. We're looking away from his instructions. We're looking away from his path and his road. We're looking away from the truth unto a lie. We're looking away unto man and unto religion. If this is your path, then it will destroy you. If you're looking to Yahuwah, then you will live. It's as simple as that. But that's your choice. We all have that choice. Secondly, to end this, is if you can prove that position from Scripture, the evening to evening, without it leading to further complication to resolve, then I say please do. I'm always open to learning. But you'll have to resolve some very difficult problems. But if you can prove it, then I'm willing to listen. May Yahuwah, may his face shine upon you, and may he bring you peace. And if you are following traditions and men, may he take your blinkers off and open your mind so that you can follow his way, his instructions, his words, out of a love for him. Shalom, shalom.